Hey guys, Sequoia here from Phoenix Off-Grid Solutions. Today we are going to take a look at the installation of this 12 volt Outequip Pro AC unit. And this is going to go in this Intech Dawn Rover travel trailer right behind me. I've already taken out the original Dometic Penguin unit and it was real bare. It's very heavy. It's probably about 100 pounds. I'm grateful that my dad was here to help me get it off the ladder. And if you're in the Intech community, you know how loud these things can be. And although I don't own one, I'm in a couple Facebook groups, and a lot of people talk about how insanely loud these units are inside the travel trailer. So the client came to me with the desire to upgrade their air conditioner to a 12 volt unit. And they decided on the Outequip Pro, which is something I've never used before. And it's certainly very popular right now. The price point is really good on their website. It's only about $900, which is almost about $900 cheaper than the 12 volt Vellet units that I'm used to installing. And I've popped it out of the box. I've taken a look through all of the components that is included, and there's some cool parts and there's some parts that I'm a little skeptical about. And we can take a look at those. Also, this travel trailer and the power system that's getting installed by me is a little different than most of my off-grid power systems. The client wanted to use a new Blue Yeti solar generator. And so the integration of that into this and also to power the AC unit is a little different. And you can check out the main video on that when I post it. But basically, the Blue Yeti is something they wanted to use so that they could take it in and out of their house if there's an emergency, and then also take it traveling with them. So let's take a look at how this 12 volt AC unit goes in. First, we can see what we're working with. And if you have any questions along the way, please drop them in the comments. Give me a like and follow. I'm posting interesting off-grid power system, heating, air conditioning, and plumbing system videos on my channel all the time. I offer full build consultations for your custom conversion. I've been doing this for over 5 years. I have 100 custom conversions under my belt, and I'm really excited and passionate about the lifestyle of off-grid living, especially in mobile applications. So yeah, with that being said, let's jump into it. All right, so what we're working with here obviously is this Outequip Pro. This is a 12 volt DC air conditioning unit, rooftop unit. It weighs about 45 pounds. You can see the size is smaller than this Dometic Penguin. I bet this thing weighs over 100 pounds. The Dometic Penguin is nice because it puts out about 13,500 BTUs. I think they even have some bigger units. On the website, the Outequip Pro, they say this is 10,000 BTUs, which for a little Intech Dawn Rover trailer is going to be, you know, if it works efficiently, and as it says, should be fine. A couple of other differences here, right? This is the interior shroud and fan duct for the Penguin. It has an inlet, and then it has outlets on the sides, on the back, and on the bottom. There's no controller or thermostat here. The thermostat and controller are separate, though you can buy a different interior shroud that has the controllers right on it. The Outequip Pro comes with the ducts, inlets, outlets, and the controller right here on the shroud. There's a small little circuit board here, which I kind of like. It's all together. There's also a little bezel here. Doesn't look like it has any mounting screws anywhere, so I'm thinking that this whole apparatus goes up in one piece. That you could probably pop, screws in here if you wanted. It comes with a 12-foot 6-gauge wiring harness that pops out of the unit right here in this back corner, which is a little different from the Vellet units if you're familiar with those. And certainly different from the Dometic Penguin. And the reason is that they give you a couple different options for running the harness inside, which I really like, and it's going to be really nice for this Intech installation. So first option is you can run the cable outside of the unit and then through another cable entry port somewhere else on the roof. The other options are to run the harness back inside the unit, take the cover off, and then down through the duct opening. And then the other option is to run it exterior to the unit and then through the actual seal, which I don't like. I don't know why you would use that that method, but maybe. But the one we're going to go with today is option number 1, having this cable enter the unit or enter the trailer separate from where the AC is mounted, and I'll show you why. And so we're going to need a separate entry port, and I'll show you which one I use when we get to that phase. But let's take a look inside the trailer, and I'll show you why. All right, so popping in here, and it's a little bit of a mess because I'm halfway through my electrical upgrade. Look at the ceiling of this Intech, right? It's only about, maybe it's 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches. Right? We have a fiberglass panel on the outside. We have 1x1 aluminum framing in the middle, and then we have some Reflectix, and then particle board panel inside, and that's it. That's the only downside to these cool Intech trailers, is that there is no insulation. There's only Reflectix and an air gap, which is a little bit of a bummer. Now, to mount an air conditioner in here and run wires through the ceiling, like this Dometic or the Dometic Penguin was, right? The cable comes through a hole with a grommet, and there's some wires here, but that's all the space you have to work with. And in the past, when I installed a 12-volt velvet unit on a Horizon, what I did was I pulled these wires back through, I dropped the ceiling panel, I enlarged the holes, and I ran 2 separate holes for 2 separate 6-gauge cables, or positive and negative. I ran them over into the wall of this bathroom, which there's a big hollow cavity in here. And we are going to be utilizing that, but we're not going to run any wires through the ceiling. And in the layout of the Horizon, this was completely adjacent to this right here. So we only had to cross the ceiling, maybe 10 inches or something like that, which was, the best I could do. And it was seamless, and you didn't see wires anywhere, which was awesome. But in this instance, we're going to I'm even going to leave these wires here. I'm not going to pull them back. Hopefully we can just bundle them inside the cover of the Outequip Pro. These wires I'm going to separate, and I'm going to wire nut and then electrical tape. It's also going to be turned off down there as well, so that nobody could turn on the AC power and have a short circuit or get shocked themselves. And then the 12-volt cables from the Outequip Pro, we're going to drop down through the ceiling, probably above the microwave. Once I pop that off, we'll take a look and see what we're working with. And then down through the wall, and then out behind all of this, and then into our electrical system, and then I'll show you how I hook that up. All right, microwave has been removed. Basically just 4 screws. I popped those out. I slid the microwave halfway out, rested the back feet onto this, and then I could reach my hand in there, unplug it, pull it out, and then I made sure I had a little spot to set it, which was right here. And this is the cheat code, right, for getting our wires into the roof and into the wall and into the electrical without seeing them or a wire cover from the inside. We're going to drop them down either above the microwave or inside of this wall, right? So there's a big opening inside of here, and you'll see it down below. When I pop out the distribution center, you can see this mess of wires that they left us, and then there's a big opening in there. So I'm going to measure from this face over, and that'll give us the idea of the distance of space that we have between the outside of the bathroom wall and the inside of the bathroom. There's also a bunch of plumbing lines, I'm sure, in there too for the shower. I'm going to cut a hole in this panel. I've already hole open. I used just a lid of a container and marked it with a Sharpie, and then used a drill with a step bit to make a pilot hole. And then I used this tool that not everyone else is going to have. This little 12-volt Ingersoll Rand battery-powered body saw. They don't even really make these anymore, but these are absolutely amazing for the work that I do. Cut the hole. These wires are back, a good 3 inches from the the face of the panel, so I didn't touch those at all, even though, you know, I wasn't sure what was there. There's a little bit of an edge on this, so I'm going to use a deburring tool, take that edge off, and then I may even put some, you know, some sort of edge covering on that. But you can see we have a little bit of space in the sidewall there for when the microwave goes back in, if we want to drop the wires down through the ceiling. We can also see what's going on in here with the wires that are going up into the ceiling. This bundle goes that way. This is obviously the 12 gauge Romex for the air conditioner. It goes up and then this way. So if we drilled a hole right here, you know, we may hit that Romex. I can also kind of feel the ceiling through that hole there in the ceiling panel. So I might just do some measuring, you know, from this hole, how far over and then how far down, and see what's on the roof in that spot there. But it, you know, might be okay to drop our cables down right where that hole is. All right, so here we are on the roof of the trailer, and I did some rough measuring from the hole over and then down to where those wires were coming through that interior panel. And I did go ahead and drilled a pilot hole with like a 1/4 inch, maybe it was a 1-foot-long drill bit, and I came out pretty close to where I thought I would. So that's where we're going to put our wires in. And the cable entry port that I'm going to use is this. I think this is by Renergy. It wasn't in a box. It's something I've had in my drawer. It's very sturdy. We're just going to glue it on with some Sikaflex. You could put some screws, I suppose, in the corners if you wanted to with some adhesive, but this is what I'm going to use. All right, so I'm installing the gasket around the 14 by 14 original opening. I came up here with some denatured alcohol and just an old rag and cleaned up the surface. And I'm putting this gasket tight to the opening, just leaving a little bit of a little reveal right on the inside. And this comes in one big piece, this foam, right? It's just like a strip that they cut using some, you know, CNC router or knife, and you have to form it and cut it to make it fit your opening. So what I'm going to do here, I think, is cut a V in here and then bend this around. That way the outside stays in one piece, and do that here as well, although I don't really like how that got compressed in shipping. I could also just kind of cut it at a 45 and then use this corner tight here and then cut it at a 45, because you run a bead of Sikaflex the whole way around it as well, so that provides a real nice barrier. This is the same kind of gasket that was included in the Mabru unit, which is like a $2,000 12 volt AC unit. It's, you know, closed cell foam, and then it also has these plugs in here which are like a hard rubber, so it keeps you from compressing it too much. And on this roof, because of the way it's constructed, the strongest part is right around the opening where we have our aluminum 1x1 tubing. There are valleys here where there's no aluminum, and this original Dometic unit really warped some of this fiberglass outer panel. Even now I'm on a pad that I made. It's 1/4 inch plywood, you know, taped and glued to a nice thick pad of foam so that my weight is distributed across some frame members. You can see here where I cut my opening for that hole, and you can see the wires right inside there. It's not very thick, so I wouldn't get up here and just walk around. But yeah, let's get this gasket figured out, and then I'll show you what I came up with. All right, here's our gasket setting up. You can see I ran a bead of Sikaflex 221 all the way around the gasket. I did what I said. I cut this into 2 sections so that I used that corner, and then I cut this into 45s and then squeezed them together. Then I spread that apart and put Sikaflex in there too, so that can, you know, strengthen that seal. And so this is an easy installation because the roof is flat. But if you were doing this on a van roof, they recommend in the book cutting the gasket to notch around the ribs, which I think would be more, I think it would just be tedious, and I don't think you'd get a good seal anyway. What I have done in the past, and I did this on the Mabru unit that used a seal similar to this, is I just took all of these out and let the air conditioner just compress this gasket all the way down. I did, put Sikaflex all the way around it as well, but having the gasket compressible means it would form around the ribs. But honestly, the best way to do something like that on a van is to buy one of the custom adapter plates from DIY Van. So check them out. I'll put a link in the description. Also back here, I mounted our entry port for the power cables. I just used the same Sikaflex, put it on the bottom of the entry port, and then sat it down around the hole. I made sure the hole was towards the back of the entry port so that when I feed my cables through one at a time, they're going to hit the back and want to go down, and so they can go down straight through the hole. Also deburred that hole too. While that seal is setting up, I came back inside to take a look at the next steps. They do include some foam blocks kind of set back from the opening to support the rear end of the AC unit. And they just have that mounted on the roof. But I would never do that because you don't know exactly. I mean, you could, but measure and whatnot. But and I've done this in all my ACs, is put these blocks just right on the back. So I took one piece and I cut it into 3, and I put them in different locations. The cable's going to run, across the back, so I left some opening there. We just need to make sure all of that stuff fits inside of the opening when we drop it down. But basically I'm just following this instruction guide, and it's giving a pretty good step-by-step of how to orient the blower opening and stuff inside of a 14 by 14 hole. And then once we have the AC down, we're going to be using these I guess we'll call them brackets, to squeeze the AC to the roof. And on the Intech, it's really easy because there's a very strong, square of support around the opening, which will just, put our threaded rods, nuts, and then squeeze that tight. All right, name of the game is don't get in the Sikaflex, because this stuff gets everywhere. I don't think there's been one time that I've ever used it that I haven't gotten it on something. I have my AC resting. We're going to pivot it down, get all that stuff right in the hole, and then we can move it a little bit side to side if we need to. AC is down. You can look underneath to see how our rear blocks are fitting. It looks like it's setting on the gasket completely. But we're going to go inside and we're going to adjust it front to back like it shows in the manual. All right, so now for the fun part. We have our AC down on the roof. We need to secure it with these, cross brackets. This is the hardware that they give you. They give you one extra of everything, which is great. But 2 different length rods, right? The part with the short threads goes up into the unit. And then the longer part sticks downward. It goes... This part faces up, the longer part goes down through that, and then you would use your washer, your lock washer, and then your locking nut. I don't know why they do that, locking nut and lock washers, but whatever, we'll use it. But these may need to be trimmed, so you need like a grinder or a hacksaw and a vise, and we don't know until we just get out there and take a look. So we're going to take a long one, and we're going to take a short one. We're going to take one of these, and we're going to see how it all connects, because you want all of that hardware to be inside the roof line or pretty close to it, because when we put our shroud on, if this stuff is long, the shroud's going to be off the ceiling, and we don't want that. All right, I came out here to kind of look at things because it wasn't making sense, so I wanted to see how each piece fits. The plastic duct here goes around this rubber edge here, and that kind of just wiggled on, right, which makes sense. But I have to get my outer shroud around all of that. Luckily, I'll have enough room to kind of hide all my original Intech Dometic wires right up in there. That's great. But yeah, now we have to figure out how to get our brackets. I see that there's metal inserts up here, although Manual is just showing our cross brackets mounted here and here, which feels like it would squeeze the unit back here, but not up front. So I don't know. I kind of want to use the front mount. All right, I have the 2 different length threaded rods just hand tight into the threaded inserts. Here's the longer one over here. I had to push my 120 volt wires back into that hole, and I wrapped them with electrical tape and then left a little flag there, so if I need to pull it out, I could. But I'll disconnect it from the actual breaker in the breaker box and just, you know, write no or dead on it. But here's our metal bracket across there. It kind of drops down out here. I'm not sure why it couldn't go like this. Would it be a little more streamlined? It wouldn't stick down as far. We may do that. I'm not sure, but I think the shorter one is going to be perfect. It's just enough thread on there for the nut, the lock washer, and the washer. But you know, this is the time where you can get creative to see how nice you can make it and how tight you can get it. Ideally, I'd like to get the shroud touching the ceiling panel, but I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. Brackets installed, short rods, thread locker up there, hand tight, upside down brackets, just a washer and just the nut. Threaded rod sticks out about 1/8 of an inch. Use the rearmost mounting location and the front mount location. Pushing the shroud up now, you can see it's bottoming out on the rear screw head. So the front is pretty close. There's maybe a 1/2 inch gap up top, and if we could get that, that would be fine because you don't notice it so much from the bottom. But it's almost 1 inch at the back. So I'm going to try moving the cross member from here up to here and see if that makes a difference. Still rubbing on the middle mounting location. All right, what can we do here? All right, this is another bracket that I had left over from another project. Not everyone's going to have this, but you could probably find this. It's basically like the C channel here, but without this little extra riser. So if I flip this over and cut it to length, and my nut, and maybe use a smaller washer if the washer doesn't fit in here, all that's going to be up by a good 1/2 inch. So that might be just what we need. I think that's going to work. Look how much higher it came up, but now we need to cut off that. So back to the grinder and taking these out for the 5th time. I also moved the mounting location to the back again. All right, painted the new cross member black. I cut my threaded inserts down with the grinder, but I also melted the lock ring in the lock nut. So I used the lock washers behind this time on the back. And so now that's pretty flush. So now we'll mount it back up. Okay, there we are. We have an even gap all the way around. It looks like it's sort of floating up there. The shroud doesn't cover the original Dometic screw holes, so I'm just going to go back and put the original screws in there. Here's the back of the shroud with the connectors plugged in. There's like a 4-wire. There's a 4-wire and a 6-pin connector that go in there. In the manual, you see that 2-pin connector there on the end. In the manual, something's plugged into that, but I don't have that connector here. I just have that one, and that's plugged in. So that's probably a temp sensor, and there's a sensor going up into the unit, and then there's a sensor here. You can see how they have that zip tie with that sticky mount there. This sensor is going to be sensing the air coming back into the unit, which is this shroud right in front of us. So I'm going to stick that right through that little zip tie and make sure that sensor is kind of out here in the middle, and then put it up. All right, it's been overnight, and our Sikaflex has cured up, and now it's time to route these cables inside. So I'm going to be taking off this fuse that comes with this. This is a 100 amp fuse. Basically that little bar would, hey, yellow jacket, get out of here. The little bar would burn up before the cable, or that's the idea, but I have my reservations. Also, I like to include a breaker switch, so I'll be using a 285 series surface mount breaker switch for this air conditioner. So I'm just going to cut this cable off right here. I'll also cut this eyelet off the negative, cut back the harness or the loom, and then get my separate cables in there that way. All right, so the trick to getting this down in through is like I'm bending my cable prematurely, sticking it in and then turning it until I can get it to go down the hole easily. And that happened with the red one, but it's not happening on camera anyway. Also, I pulled the rubber washers off the actual cable gland and the nut and fed them down on the cable separately because these are pretty tight, and it would have been a real bear to get this cable through all of these things at the same time. So I'm making my life easier. And then once I get my cables run all the way down, then I'll push this little washer inside of this like that, and then tighten my nut down. All right, here's my cable routing. This is some, it's a Turnabond tape. It's not a Turnabond tape. It's like a Turnabond tape. It's by X-Fasten. I'll have a link in the description for this stuff, but this is what I use to hold down solar cables. And I'm using it for these AC cables. You know, less screws in the roof, the better. This stuff is really strong. If it fails, then we don't, you know, if it fails, then there's no holes in the roof. We just put some more on. And I clean the surface with more of that denatured alcohol. Back here, I just use some mounting zip ties and use some stainless steel screws just to keep that bit of the cable attached to the air conditioner there. I did want to say also, like, hey, why couldn't you run the cables through this entry port and then down through the hole and then add Sikaflex and then push this whole thing down? Well, yeah, I could, but in my experience, it gets messy. Also, the way the cables are routed kind of may pop the box up a little bit. So in the past, I've, you know, put a weight on top of it and held the whole thing down, or I've put tape over it to hold it down with the cables in it. And yeah, if you're in a rush, you could do that. I just don't like getting messy with this Sikaflex, so I choose to do it, you know, the way where I just push the entry port down, let it sit naturally, let it cure up, and then run my cables in, even if it just takes me a couple minutes to route my my cables in there. Back inside the trailer, we have our cables run down. I pushed the rest of that wire loom back on. Yeah, I mean, this cable is not going to reach the whole way over to where I need it to, so I need to make a junction somewhere. I'm going to run it down here and see how far I can get it, and then I'll decide how I want to make that junction. All right, so I decided to go with these 6-gauge butt connectors. I'm just going to pop those on here, pop them on the other end. I drilled a hole to get my cables up through there to make it a little bit of a shorter run. There's my AC breaker by EGIS, and 60 amps. It runs all the way back to our small power distribution center. All right, now it's time to power up this unit. We have everything installed, our power connection made. Press and hold the on button. It's coming on at 65. You can change as low as we can go, 63. We can adjust the fan speed. There is a remote, I believe. Just put it on halfway. And it's blowing cold air. Actually had this running yesterday for about 6 hours, and it was quite cool inside. I'm not sure if the sound delivery is the same as in person, but it's quite quiet. Obviously there's a little bit of sound from the air moving through the vents, but there's also a little rumble and a little vibration that you can feel through the roof from the components working outside.